Okay. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday Night in the Word. We are doing things a little bit differently here tonight, primarily because it's snowing like crazy outside, and none of us wanted to take a ride out in the snow and risk banging up our cars in order to do a Bible study. But we have a very important message tonight, and we're very excited to share it with you. And so, what we wanted to do is we wanted to make certain we deliver this message because it's very timely. We're analyzing Santa Claus tonight, so that's going to be what we're doing. So, I hope you guys enjoy our stay at home, quarantined under snow Wednesday night in the Word. With us tonight, we have two very special people. We have the very enigmatic Russell Palmer, of course, and we have the very wise and sagely Justin Lunetta. So those guys are going to be taking care of the study, and what I'm going to do now is turn it over to those guys and let them go. So when you guys are ready, Russell, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Lee, very much for that wonderful introduction. Lee is technically our software host for the evening, so I want to thank him ahead of time for bringing this all together. We've gone through some hoops over the past couple hours to try and figure this out, and it worked out great. So first of all, thank you, Lee. Tonight's Bible study, as usual, is a live Bible study. So please feel free to send us messages, comments, whatever you're thinking and feeling. And if you like what you're learning, feel free to like and then subscribe to our channel to get all the notifications on our latest content that comes out on YouTube. Let's jump into our Facebook question, which didn't get many responses to because somebody by the name of Rachel kind of ruined it for everybody. So anyway, our question of the week was, what is the only NFL team to throw snowballs at Santa? And you get bonus points if you know the year. But in light of the Eagles having a major win on Sunday, which I'm sure Lee and Justin are ecstatic about, top of their list.
We had no idea.
They had no idea.
Nor did
the
we
Eagles
care.
in 1968 were the only team to throw snowballs at Santa, and Santa has refused to come back to the Eagles Stadium.
Okay,
So that was the answer.
I'm going to jump in, Russell, because I'm curious.
Okay.
So
Yes.
why are Philadelphia teams so horrible and throw snowballs at Santa? Why can't they all just get along? Why was this a thing that happened? Do you know?
This was a terrible season for the Eagles. Apparently, like I think they won like maybe 2 games, and so I mean, it was a new team that year in the draft. They got nobody they needed, and the fans were completely distraught. They were totally upset with the staff and everybody, and this is just their way of showing how pleased they were at how the Eagles were playing, how they were being managed, and they took it out on this Santa Claus. So Santa originally, I think, for the game was sick and couldn't show up, so they even had a backup Santa Claus come, or maybe he was out of the stands, whatever happened may be, but he came out and they were just so upset at everything at halftime. They threw snowballs at this guy. Poor Santa. It is terrible. It is so there's an article we should share in the notes of the thing. They can go read it on the history. And even ESPN did a spotlight on this feature for how bad the Eagles were for throwing snowballs at Santa. So
yeah, that's pretty bad. Okay, well,
yes.
Hopefully nobody throws snowballs at us tonight as we're trying to deliver the word of God. But with that said, Russell, take it away.
All right. Like Lee said earlier, tonight we're going to be talking about analyzing Santa Claus. So we're here now at a special time when I have to give an advisory. Parents, to those who love their children out there, we have something that we need to tell you. Again, as Justin said last week, we're going to be talking about Santa Claus. Very candid talks about Santa Claus. So as I talk really slow and drag this out, now is your opportunity to put those wonderful little kids to bed if you don't really want them to hear certain things about Santa Claus. That's coming soon. So with that said, you've had your notice. Let's get into the study for tonight. Justin, what do you have for us tonight?
Thank you, Russell. Thank you. I actually have a lot for us tonight, really. I'm going to start off, though, by saying that the prior discussion about the football team throwing the snowballs at Santa, I caught about 12% of that. I've
That's like
I
the
have
Eagles
seen
did that season.
I have seen a football game. So I'm not so well versed on, and I knew some of those words. Some of those words.
I got what
But
you
yes,
were throwing there when you
what
said
was that?
that you caught about 12%. That's maybe what the Eagles caught in that season.
Well played. Well played. But yes, yes. Thank you all for joining us. As Russell said, we're gonna tonight be kind of diving into the reality of Santa Claus, jolly old Saint Nick, Sinterklaas, Father Christmas, Kris Kringle, whatever term you're familiar with for him. And kind of in keeping with the theme we had last week when we discussed, Christmas carols, kind of where they came from, and we got to that point where I mentioned Good King Wenceslaus and how it does a good job of exemplifying some bad habits that the church had back in the day of trying to take these cultural things and make them Christian, trying to paint a Jesus coating on something that's not really Christian, so to speak. And that's going to be a lot of what we talk about tonight when we talk about Santa Claus and kind of where this comes from, where these traditions come from. Why don't we go ahead, Russell, put up some of those pictures of what we probably recognize as Santa Claus.
All right, give me 1 second. I will put that up for you right about now. Look at this guy.
There we go. So this is what you're probably all familiar with when it comes to Santa. So I'll give everybody a little bit of background on myself in this venue. I grew up in a household that actually didn't do Santa. I don't know how many other people like myself are out there. I think this is kind of it's an oddity these days. But my parents made it a point to teach me and my siblings from a very young age that Santa wasn't real. Our presents came from mommy and daddy and grandparents and family and stuff like that, but that we should not be jerks about it. Like other kids were going to know Santa and believe in Santa, and when they come and say, "Hey, what did Santa bring you for Christmas?" Not to be like, "Well, Santa's not real," and just kind of shut it down, but to be like, "No, I don't believe in Santa, but if you do, that's fine," that kind of a thing. So that's kind of where I come from, how I grew up. So I never really had that background, but I always found him to be a very interesting character. So Russ, did you guys do Santa when you were younger?
We did, and we did. It's weird because Jess's family did like presents like Christmas Eve, and I'm like, but Santa hasn't come yet. How do you have Christmas if Santa hasn't come yet? So I want to see in the comments. Please tell me who had Santa on Christmas Eve, or excuse me, who opened presents on Christmas Eve, and who did it on Christmas? Because I want to know. Because we always read the Christmas story in Luke, the real Christmas story, before we went to bed Christmas Eve, and we would also eat one or the other before. I don't know, and then we'd read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." So we always did both. And then Sunday morning, yeah, it's Santa. We're presents. What's up? So we did do it. And as I was growing up, I learned more about Santa. And I told my mom, I don't know if I'm going to do Santa Claus with my kids one day. And she cried. She's like, what do you mean you're not going to do? We did Santa and you turned out okay. I'm like, yeah, but it could have been a little bit more focused on the real thing, And I mean, granted, did I turn out okay? Jury's still out, but so far, Jess and I are so excited to see Winston's face when he comes down on Christmas morning, and I'm like, why should he be happy? So we're going through that right now with a young child. But happy wife, happy life. So I'll leave it at that.
That's a good point. And I think it's fair for me to go ahead and kind of start with the ending just a little bit and kind of say that while I personally am not a big fan of the whole Santa tradition thing, because I do think it caused some problems. I'll go into that a little bit later. I also don't want to say that it's absolutely wrong for any Christian family to do it. If it's your tradition, that's fine. It's just, yeah, what are the kids growing up to see as the most important part of Christmas? You know, if you can do this and still have the truth of Christmas come out, if you can have the salvation story, the fact that Jesus' birth points to that salvation story, if that can be the most important part of Christmas, then fantastic. You know, the other traditions that support, as long as they support that and don't detract from it in any way, that's, you know, between you and your family and God, so to speak. But now let's take a look at some of where we get to this tradition we have now. I will say I'm going to be bouncing over a few hundred years of history, and it was difficult to try and arrange some of these things in a proper timeline. So I may skip around a bit, but I'm going to try to present to you all the kind of the highlights, the big points. Santa really winds up being an amalgamation of two concepts. The first one being this idea of a character called Father Christmas, which we get from the 16th century. He was kind of a personification of Christmas cheer, invented to symbolize joy, feasting, drinking, and peace at Christmas time. And if that concept is bringing up images in some of your heads, I would expect it to. Russell, why don't you bring up those Christmas present pictures there? This character is what Charles Dickens wound up using in his famous story, A Christmas Carol, for the character of Christmas Present. He was very heavily based on this idea of Father Christmas, which, side note, I will say, Dickens does a great job of using this character to point back to Christ. One of my favorite parts of A Christmas Carol, if for anybody who hasn't read it, is where Christmas Present basically says, you know, the point of this day is not, I'm paraphrasing, but it's the child that was born for us on this day, and the fact that he doesn't live in our hearts just this one day of the year, but the whole 365. Awesome way to use this idea to point back to Jesus. But the other character that largely, I would say, if two characters influenced Santa Claus the most, one was Father Christmas and the other was Woden, who you might know as Odin, Norse god. Why don't you go ahead and throw up that Woden picture, if you would, Russell? He famously was a brightly robed, long, white bearded fella who was known to ride through the snow and deliver gifts to his devotees. That was a big part of his history and his backstory and his mythology. And a lot of the idea for Santa Claus does come out of the same region of the world that Odin came from, the kind of Nordic areas and a lot of what we call the modern, like, Dutch areas and Netherlands and things like that. So basically what we had was, as early Christians were spreading into those Norse cultures, kind of instead of doing what we see recommended in Scripture, like what Paul teaches to early Christians and things like that, where he says to kind of, you know, get rid of the old gods. Unfortunately, a lot of early Christians started trying to bring the old gods of the cultures they were witnessing to into Christianity somehow. Like I said at the beginning, painting a code of Christianity on these concepts that they had. And unfortunately, the problem we run into with this sort of thing is that it winds up compromising the faith rather than helping the new believer at the end of the day. It's hard to maintain this character, this new addition, shall we say, to the Christian character story when this character comes from a place outside of Scripture. So they did all kinds of things to try and fix this, because every now and then you invent a new character and then over time it starts to break down. So you have to jam new things into it. And so one of the things they did, similar to the Wenceslas story, is that they wanted a person, an actual human being, to link to these concepts so they'd be more graspable by people. And they were big fans in the early church of taking these sainted individuals and kind of making them into spiritual superheroes, so to speak. So in this case, they found a fella by the name of Nicholas. Nicholas of Myra was his name. And I'm not going to go into his story just yet, because I want to focus on the Santa Claus thing first. But they took this guy who had a really cool story of some notable charitable acts, and then they kind of took the Father Christmas mantle and put it on top of him and kind of turned him into this thing. Let's go to that picture of Santa Mid 1, if you could, guys.
Santa Mid 1. Let me find that one just real quick.
Oh. And while he's pulling that up, what they did, so they took this Nicholas, they made him into a saint, and so now his new name becomes Saint Nicholas. So they start to add in, you can see with the robes, especially in this picture here, the robes still bear a lot of that Odin influence, a lot of the long and flowing, and he's still kind of thin and gangly, and has a staff, has a walking stick, and very much associated with nature. The very long beard. It's we're still using a lot of that original kind of Norse influence on this. And the Dutch culture actually took a really strong liking to this character, and they gave him a name, Sinterklaas, which is really just Dutch for Saint Nicholas. But that name, because they took the character and ran with it, then hundreds of years later, it makes its way back to the Americas by around the 1700s. So then we learn the name Sinterklaas and pronounce it weird because we're Americans, and that becomes Santa Claus. So that's where that name comes from. Let's see. Which I'll also say too, interestingly enough, St. Nicholas was not actually associated with Christmas Day. Not at the beginning. Not until, honestly, just a couple hundred years ago. He was actually associated with December 6th. That was the Santa Claus holiday, because that was supposedly the day he died. The actual man that the character was based on. And the point of the St. Nicholas Day was to remember the poor and needy who weren't able to celebrate the upcoming festivities the way everybody else would. So that his day was to remind you to go out and help those who were less fortunate than yourself. But kind of as you keep an eye on the story, you see that it kind of slowly changes to almost mean even the opposite of that, which kind of has some good intent behind it and is fair. But so we have this Christmas figure, we have this this holiday around this new Christmas figure, and it kind of tells you, be generous to your neighbor, right? Go help them out. This shifts into a day to give everybody gifts. It becomes this whole thing about just give everybody gifts. Then it becomes a thing of trying to keep your children in line. Good gifts to the good and bad gifts to the naughty. So then they start to layer in even more kind of folk story stuff. There's there's a lot of, I should say, up in those kind of Nordic culture areas, the Netherlands and the Dutch lands. Like I said, they've got these stories about old wizards and magicians who would wander through the land and reward good children and punish naughty ones. And this is kind of, it's very typical. How many cultures have the witch who eats up the bad children stories? We've got a ton of them in old American folklore, and your European and Irish, and everywhere across the world has something like that. But the interesting thing about these particular stories was that the way you figured out, at the season when the wizards come through, the way you figured out if you as a child had been good or bad was that you left your shoes outside on this particular night in question. And if you'd been good, the wizard would leave you like a gold coin or a little candy or a little treat or something like that. And if you'd been bad, they would leave a piece of coal in the shoe or like a potato. And that was kind of the symbol that, like, oh, you better be careful, because that means you got to get your act together or the wizard's going to kill you. And so that kind of wraps into this whole Santa Claus thing, and that now Saint Nicholas not only is encouraging you to remember to care for the needy, now he's not only telling you just to party and buy presents, now he's this thing that kind of scares the bad children and rewards the good children. This kind of branches out to the well, as I was saying, but the problem with that is that you can't have Santa Claus. You can't have this saint character killing children, right? So the idea is that the kids, like I said, they get the coal or the potato, and that means get your act together or you're in trouble. But you can't have the saint doing that. So this is where things go way off the rails, and they invent a character that you may have heard of called Krampus, who's the Christmas devil. And I should have had a picture of him, but that I didn't have enough time to grab that one. But he kind of becomes Santa's negative counterpart. I'm not going to go too deep into that story because that's a whole nother thing. But now we have Santa rewarding the good kids and this Krampus character punishing the bad ones.
Hey, Justin.
Yes.
We're getting a couple of comments about the potato thing. Like, are potatoes
Yes.
like evil? Like, is there any like something behind this? Like, because I mean, even your wife's like, "Hey, I'll take the potato," but I mean, like, well, what's the deal with the potato?
Okay, so the best I can figure on the potato thing, because at first I was like, they must mean a rotten potato, right? Like they've got to mean a bad potato, which that might be it, but I didn't see that specifically. So what I think it might be, because we also think too of like, there's cultures that have survived because of potatoes, you know? Like I think in this area, the potato might have been considered like peasant food. It might have been more like lower class. So it might have been seen as something unpleasant to receive it as a gift, you know. I guess it'd be like giving somebody, for us, I'm just trying to think of something, so like a kale leaf, you know, or or an asparagus stalk.
I was gonna say, with today's young people, actually the coal would be like the worst thing you could possibly give them. Oh, the environment, you're giving me coal, you know, like, yeah, go burn that, haha, millennial. You know? All right,
Which
totally
is funny too, because yeah, you think that back in some at some points in history, depending on where you lived, the idea of receiving a piece of coal or a potato, like that's, oh, thank you, like that means I can live another day. I can have a little more heat, like. So that's what I think. But once again, we start to see this shifting, and it becomes almost a class thing, where these things are considered so low and so unimportant to the culture that's telling the story and inventing these concepts that it's the, oh yeah, well, if you receive something that's so common, that means you're bad.
Okay.
Let's see.
Of course, Wayne chimes in. It's a miracle food to the Irish. Like, all right, Wayne, you know. All right,
But
Santa.
but like you can already kind of see, right? There's a degrading value. Everybody do good because of this good man's example. Then step down. Everybody do good because you'll be rewarded. Step down. Everybody do good or you'll be punished. Then do good or a demon will take you to hell. It's like we're trying to tell a moral lesson without actually having a moral. What?
I said Christmas just got real, y'all.
There you go.
You're going to hell, children. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, that's what you want wrapped into your Christmas traditions, is the whole like scaring your kids with, you know, better be good or you're going to hell.
Wayne does remind us, you better not wait, what's the line? You better watch out, you better not cry. Like, this is like serious. Like, kids, you better not cry.
Exactly. So what we get to also is, especially with this Father Christmas idea, Christmas is becoming, it's the idea of it and the reason for it has gotten so stretched out, and it's gotten so spread so thin that it's either this like way to get things for kids, or for adults it's party time. You know, it's a reason to party. So going back to the Father Christmas concept, the idea, because that's the thing, is he embodied the spirit of generosity, but that tended to just mean partying. So for the adults, that's kind of where Christmas started to fall. And like last week, Jesse mentioned Saturnalia and how that was this time of wild partying that kind of fell around the same season from the Roman culture. Well, Father Christmas, I mentioned he's one of the characters that Santa's based on. But if we're really being fair and really being specific with the character, it even goes further back than that. That's not even the original character. Even the idea of Father Christmas is kind of based on this character called the King of Saturnalia, which was a person who's kind of chosen as the one who rules over the festivities of the Saturnalia feasts. It's very similar to, if you've ever heard of some cultures would do something called the King of Fools, where you'd take a person, one man, and you'd give them like complete power for a day. And the idea of it was to kind of teach the people how foolish it is for power to sit in the hands of one person. But what it would ultimately turn into is this one person would go around making ridiculous party rules, like everybody drink till you puke, or everybody strip and go skinny dipping. It becomes a reason for debauchery, basically, this character, because it's the one day. We know the reason is to teach us that one man shouldn't have all this power, but we're going to do all the stuff we couldn't get away with for the rest of the year.
And this is why we had a parental advisory. and as I bring that up, my wife reminds me that, and now we have Elf on the Shelf. And people are like, yeah, that would creep me out. That like Elf on the Shelf watching me the whole time. So there's just this evolution of craziness. So please continue.
Right. So as I'm saying, with this concept, people ultimately get to the point where they're too busy looking forward to this one time a year when they can party like crazy to learn any intended lessons. But we took that idea, early Christians, and turned it into, oh yes, we do party, but it's all about your fellow man. It's all about your fellow man. And in the ancient culture, it wound up in areas like Jesse was describing last week, when Christians were still being persecuted, where this became a reason to kind of break into Christian homes and ransack them and attack them and things like that. But as Christianity becomes the major religion in Rome, and these kind of things have to stop, we don't have people attacking Christians anymore. We don't necessarily have kind of the extreme drunken revelry and orgies and things that were going on. But we do have these festivals. We do have these great big festivals, and this Father Christmas character that we can take from that. But since the point of this was ultimately about partying, and we were trying to make it about Jesus, eventually, over time, this initially pagan tradition, instead of becoming a Christian thing, would always keep slipping back towards its pagan roots. This goes so far off the rails that by the 1700s, the Christmas tradition included, in some areas, carolers breaking into people's homes to ransack them, and Christmas parties going basically back to the Roman roots of like open orgies, basically just Saturnalia, but called Christmas. And I will say that might sound kind of insane to us now, to think of Christmas being this kind of big sexual promiscuous thing. But I'd like to recommend that the next time you walk through, say, a Walmart or a Target, you do so with your eyes maybe a little bit more open than the past, especially if you're walking down the media aisle, and look at the imagery used to advertise some Christmas albums, and even some films and and art and things like that. People use the term sex sells, and that applies to Christmas too. And it's still enforced even to this day. Now, of course, I'm going a little off kilter here because the Santa concept isn't the cause of this, but it is still a part of it. And I think it's important for us to kind of remember this. when we start to, like I said, when we start to repurpose things, when we water down the truth to make people comfortable with things that aren't good for them, we kind of wind up losing control of the thing that we have. Um, let's go to that picture of Santa from the 1800s.
Okay. He's going to come up right now.
There we go. So this is where he starts to turn into what we know today. As I mentioned, in the 1700s, things were getting crazy out of hand. So Santa gets repurposed, and his intent, for a while, actually, he's used as this kind of authority figure, kind of explaining the true meaning of Christmas and chiding the people who have been going off the rails with it. And to be fair, some people did have him explain the true meaning of Christmas in this fashion. But for a lot of people, it was less about pointing back to Jesus and more about don't abuse Santa's day. Don't abuse his holiday. This is about brotherly love and feasting and partying and not about your crazy robbery and promiscuity. But yeah, so every now and then, from this point on, we see these changes to Santa. Things start to go crazy. They start to go off the rails. Every now and then, somebody goes back and adds something to him, or tries to reinvent his origin. To just about everything you can think of that you might know as a part of the Santa lore probably comes from this era, from the 1800s onward. For example, somebody went back and took Odin's his horse. In mythology, he had an 8-legged horse. Well, they took that and they turned that into Santa's 8 reindeer. But then some people go.
An 8-legged horse.
Yeah.
And wow. All right. This is just mind blowing here. Okay. So 8-legged horse. Now we have 8 reindeer. Gotcha. But where's Rudolph? Where is Rudolph in all this? We got to find this out. Come on.
Rudolph's in like 1920.
Stop killing
Rudolph
me,
is really recent.
Okay. All right.
I don't quote me on that date. I'm pretty sure he's 1900s. Like, he's not old. He actually might be closer to like the 50s. And then we even get things where people try to link Santa to Jesus in weird ways. Like, I don't know if any of you have heard back. I know it was being pushed a lot when I was a kid, the idea of trying to repurpose Santa into some lost fourth wise man who never got to make it to Jesus to give him his gifts. So God let him live forever, and now he goes around giving people gifts because he couldn't give them to Jesus. Which, I mean, there's all kinds of problems with that. First of all, like, just the easy ones, like the Bible doesn't say there were 3 wise men. There were 3 kinds of gifts. There were probably many wise men. And there's so many things wrong with that. But I think, I'm going to go ahead and transition to what I think is one of the bigger problems with the idea of Santa Claus before I go into kind of the historical truth here. We tell a story about a character who gives presents to all the good boys and girls, or even we can change it to all the Christian boys and girls or whatever. But how do we explain, if we're doing this, if we're telling this story, how do we explain when good boys and girls whose parents happen to be struggling financially don't get presents for Christmas? Or they get very meager presents, but they turn around and see that the school bully, whose parents happen to be very comfortable, got a ton of cool stuff for Christmas. How do we make that gel with this made up story? Because now it feels like, oh, well, I was good. I was trying to be really good and obedient this whole year. And then Santa gave me socks, and, Billy the Bully got, new Xbox. Does that mean Santa doesn't love me? Or the other side of that is the whole, oh, well, screw it. I'm just going to be bad because it's not worth it for me to try hard to be good. And then even the other side of it, too, is that we get to a point where eventually children grow up and they start to ask questions and they start to put 2 and 2 together. And then you come to that concept of, so wait a minute, so you're telling me that there really isn't somebody who brings me presents? There really isn't some magical bearded person in the sky that does nice things for me? Maybe the other person who you've been telling me to believe in isn't real either. Um, it can be damaging. It can be damaging to a child's faith to be taught that something that's not real is real, when they're already going to have to struggle as they grow up with a thing that is real, but the world is telling them isn't real.
Actually, real quick, Justin,
sure.
to that point, I met somebody at an old job, and we were talking about faith at one time, and the line that I got back blew me away. She basically said, "You can stop right there. I'm too old to believe in Santa Claus." And I'm like, the church didn't prepare me to speak to this. I don't feel prepared to answer what you just said to me with an adequate answer. So I'm gonna go back and know some more about Santa Claus. I'll be back. But I was shocked. That's the first time anybody had really combatively came back at me and said something about where they stand with faith, and they want nothing to do with my religion, and the way that they phrased it was using Santa Claus, and I will never forget that.
And that's the thing, because for the world, what we believe might as well be a fairy tale like Santa Claus. And that's one of the things too, is I'm going to kind of show you over the next few minutes how a true story gets turned into fairy tale. And they would love to assume that our faith is that as well. And if we're running around trying to carry both the truth that they don't believe and the fairy tales, that can be hard. That can be very difficult. And once again, I don't want to say there's no way to do Santa Claus. Just know the other side of it. Know the dangerous aspect of it. And also too, and what I want to get into now, I want to talk about the guy who it's based on, because just like I mentioned last week with Saint Wenceslas, the actual Duke Wenceslas was a good man, and he was a good Christian, and he was a good example for us. And without the fanciful made-up miracles that are associated with the guy, he stands as somebody who we can kind of look at as a good example of somebody who did good with his position. And the same thing we have with Nicholas, who I'm gonna stick to referring to him as Nicholas now because that's his name. He was a real man, like I said. He was of Greek descent. He was born about 270 AD by best sources. I will say a lot of the information I'm going to present about him is up for debate. I'm going to try to get down to the most accurate I can. Russell's got an image there of probably the best we can surmise that he actually looked like. This would have been from around his era, maybe a little later than his era, but still trying to reference him specifically. And I like these images of him there because they're simple. You look at him and he's got a robe. That's the symbol of the position he held. He carries his Bible, and that's pretty much it. He's not a man who puts on airs. He's not a man who does the big kind of showy thing. For contrast, Russell, why don't you pull up that picture of Santa Nick 1? Because this is what
Santa Nick 1?
Yeah. It should be.
I have a Santa
it's the one where
Nick.
he's got the. There you go, with the kids.
Oh, yes.
There we go. So this is what he kind of gets turned into. This is what happens when you take a man and you saint him and you make him this big and fanciful and overblown kind of a thing.
So like
but yeah, he's very papal. Yeah. And I'll get to why that kind of gets done. So he lived, by best accounts, he lived about 73 years, and most of his life was spent in Myra. So that's why some people call him Nicholas of Myra, which is in modern day Turkey during the Byzantine Empire. So the best records would suggest that he was born into something of a wealthy family. Let's get off this and go back to the real guy.
He's called Santa Pope. I'm gonna call him Santa Pope. We'll go back to
Um,
this guy.
so yes, I was saying his. It seems his parents were fairly well off, and at some point, probably in Nicholas's young adulthood, his parents passed away, left him a small fortune, and he wound up being guided very much by his uncle, who was a bishop in Myra. And his uncle recognized that Nicholas had a great love for God and a great respect for God. And so he pushed Nicholas to enter the priesthood and to become a servant of God. Because of his rise in the church and the inheritance he had been left, he wound up donating much of his family's wealth to those who were less fortunate than himself. I guess after all, he kind of figured that he wouldn't need much wealth living as a priest, and he genuinely cared about people because of how much he loved Christ. So it was nothing to him to give away, to give to those who needed. And this is where we get to probably the most famous story about Nicholas. Yeah, go for the daughter's one. He heard of a man who had once been wealthy, but others envied this man so much that they plotted to swindle him out of all of his wealth. And they actually succeeded in doing so. The man also had 3 young daughters. And the fear was that the men who had swindled him out of his money would then be able to either force the man to sell them his daughters, or the idea is that without money and to find them good husbands, the daughters would wind up resorting to prostitution to survive. So just to clarify, the reason that the money was needed at the time in order for them to be married and safe, back then you needed a dowry to arrange a marriage, to arrange a legal marriage. If you couldn't do that, if you couldn't procure a dowry, the marriage would not be recognized, and legal action could still be taken to, say, purchase or acquire those individuals. And people were still treated that way back then. So basically, Nicholas, being a man who desperately wanted to help, but also being a very humble man, very modest man, who took the scripture very seriously that says, don't let your right hand know what your left hand is doing when you're giving us unto the Lord. He took that very seriously. So to avoid unnecessary praise being heaped upon himself, he went to that man's home in the night and dropped a bag of gold in the window with just enough money to be a reasonable dowry for one daughter. He kept an eye on the situation, and when he learned that the man had successfully married off his eldest daughter, he snuck back the next night with another bag of gold, dropped it in the window, and then sat back and waited to see, what would happen. So some accounts of the story claim that after the second bag of gold, the father stayed awake for 2 nights to see who had been helping them. And when he saw the third bag come through the window, he runs outside to confront the man and finds Nicholas there. He thanks him profusely, and Nicholas simply replies saying, please don't tell anybody. Just don't tell anybody. I want to do this as unto God. I want to help you. I don't need any recognition. Just take care of your daughters and be well. And of course, the man told people, as it tends to be. But so that's how we have that story. But that story slowly got twisted to fit into the mythical Santa we know now. It gets changed to, well, he would chuck the gold in the window and it would land in the girls' stockings that were drying on the fireplace. And that became the whole hang the stockings on your mantle thing. And then it became, oh, well, he would actually wait until everybody went to bed and drop the gold down the chimney. But the problem was in Myra, where he lived at the time he lived, they didn't have chimneys like we have, or especially like we had in the 1700s, 1600s, the era where they invented a lot of the Santa Claus mythology. And it was because of what they knew, they tried to fit his story into what they knew, that we get the whole gifts in the stockings thing. Largely comes from that. But ultimately, Nicholas, to go on with his story a little bit, he would become the Bishop of Myra, that position held by his uncle. Not directly. His uncle passed away. Another man stepped up. That man ultimately passed away, and then they put Nicholas in charge. And he was actually very reluctant to take that position, both because he didn't want to be a prideful man, but also because the Roman Empire was still in the habit of persecuting Christians at this time. But the people around him, they recognized his faith, they recognized his fervor for God, and so they pushed him. They kept pushing to, like, they wanted him as their leader, and ultimately he accepted. And his fears actually would come to pass. He was arrested and thrown into prison not terribly long after becoming the bishop, and he was in prison for a while. Long enough for the emperor who was in charge when he was thrown in prison to die, a new emperor to come into place, and for that emperor to die. And it's then that a fellow you may have heard of named Constantine shows up on the scene. And he makes Christianity the major religion in the area. He frees all the Christian prisoners, including Nicholas. And he goes on to have this career as the bishop. And he actually makes himself very involved in the local legal system. You can go ahead and put those pictures up if you want to, Russell. There's a lot of stories about Nicholas, and they get adjusted to include some fairly miraculous events and things like that. But the fact of the matter is, at least to the most realistic that I can see from these stories, is that he took it upon himself to seriously look at court cases that were leading up to execution. And several times he made his presence known to prevent executions that, by analyzing the situation, he found to be unjust. And a few stories even suggest that he was able to get correct punishment to be brought upon those who tried to twist the system to kill innocent men. A really cool story, a really cool idea that this guy would become this ruler and then use this power to try and save people, and really take his time to analyze what was going on in his area. And now my personal favorite story about Nicholas, because there's a lot of stories about him. Some of them are very fantastical, to the point where I would argue they've been wildly altered, if not outright made up. But this one I like. So I'm going to try to tell the most reasonable version of this story, because people will argue that it's not accurate either. But it seems that he was present at the Council of Nicaea, the first council in 325 AD. It was a council of all the major church figures of the time. They came together to try and clarify certain biblical ideals for the sake of properly understanding the scriptures and properly worshiping God. And one of the major things that was being discussed at this council was the divine nature of Jesus, and what that meant with regards to humanity, what that meant with regards to how Jesus the Son interacts with God the Father. Now, there are two lists of names that you can find recording the attendees to the council. The first list is a very short list, and it does not record Nicholas's name. But that list is primarily a list of people who signed the First Nicene Creed. Years later, they found a second list, which was significantly larger, probably included the full roster of attendees. And we do find Nicholas, Bishop of Myra, on that list. So as I was saying, they're discussing the divine nature of Christ. And there's this major argument over whether Christ is indeed one with God the Father, as stated in Scripture, or if he was simply a crafted being like any other human, but one who happened to have a little bit more divine attribute, though still fully subset to God, as in not equal with God, a step down, and also not eternal, in that while he may continue on forever, he has a beginning created point and has not existed from eternity to eternity. This idea, this concept, it's a wildly heretical doctrine. We know this is not true. This does not gel with Scripture, and it came from a man named Arius, which we call this false belief the Arian heresy. So the story goes that I'll tell the fun version. The story goes that Arius was standing before the council, basically filibustering his point on the nature of Christ. He's just going on and on and on and on and on, trying to get everybody to believe that Jesus is not really God, just a created being. And because the council is full of mild-mannered Christian, respectable men, they're letting him talk, and they're waiting for him to finish his point. But Nicholas is sitting there in the crowd just fuming. He's just furious at the blasphemy that this man is spewing. And eventually he reaches a boiling point, and he stands up, walks up to Arius, who made no move to stop, thinking that he was getting ready for an impromptu debate, and Nicholas just punches him square in the face, drops him to the ground. Nicholas is then arrested for disputing the meeting, his bishop's vestments being taken from him, and he's tossed in a jail cell overnight. In the fantastical version of the story, he has a dream where Mary comes to him and says, "Why are you in jail?" And he says, "Because I love your son too much." At which point, the story goes that he wakes up and an angel gives him his vestments, and then the Emperor Constantine himself comes through the cell and sees him with his robes on and says, "Well, clearly you can't be wrong," and releases him. The reality of the situation is most likely that the person who was speaking was one of Arius's followers, and he was probably going on rather long and rather long-winded, preaching Arius's doctrines, which, Russ, you can go ahead and put some of those pictures up if you want. Preaching Arius's doctrines, but not as well worded as Arius would have. So he's inciting people to be a little bit more angry, and that Nicholas did indeed come down and at least give him a hearty smack in front of everybody, and probably was kind of put into a cell to kind of cool off overnight, so to speak. Nothing quite so grand as it gets to be, but I like it. I like this story that this guy that we've turned into this kind of jolly old gift bringer was really a man who was incredibly meek, incredibly mild, except when you started screwing with scripture, except when you started saying God isn't who he says he is and Jesus isn't who he says he is. Then he got mad, and then he couldn't contain himself, and he had to do something.
This is my favorite picture. This is my favorite picture right here.
Isn't it great?
This is great. Wait, Lee, we gotta put this back on. I know you can hear me, you can't see me. This is like in the talk to the hand, you know? Arius, you have been denied. This is the best one.
Yeah, that one. I think that one might be my favorite. That one, or the one where it looks like he's gently smacking him, like his hand is gently pressed against him.
Oh wait, no, I know it's gonna be this one.
There you go.
It's like, I'm gonna caress your face, Arius. Smack,
Okay, guys.
So that's.
Hang on, I'm gonna interrupt. We didn't get to see the infamous Batman picture. So if we could go back.
Go ahead and put that up.
That one. Yeah.
There are tons of Nicholas punching Arius memes. I'll let you drink that one in for a moment. But
this is so good.
But I love it. I love it. It's one of my favorite, like, kind of fun Christendom stories. But yeah, that's the real guy. That's the real Nicholas. That's the real man. A man who was just he was a humble man who came into church leadership, used what God gave him to help others, and stood up for what was right. And it's a beautiful story, and we lose it. We lose it so much because he's turned into this thing of jolliness and presents and reindeer and all this mystical aspect and all this fanciful aspect, and we lose the fact that this was a man who served God. This was a man who served God, and he served him sincerely. And I think sometimes it's even a disrespect to the memory of the man himself to turn him into something so crazy and ridiculous. Russell, why don't you throw up that last picture I had? Because this is I'm going to kind of wrap up with this. I think if you're going to do Santa, if it's a tradition you want to do, I think it's very important that he point to Christ. Best if you can carve out some of the fantastical elements, some of the things that are going to make it hard for a child as they grow up. Best if you can, talk about his memory rather than make a character, I would say. But even if you are going to make a character, let him be one that points to Christ. Because that's the thing. The whole point of Christmas is that Christ came. That he came, that he was born, that his birth is a reminder for us of his death. And that thing that pays for our salvation, that thing that makes us right with God, that Christ came for us. And if we're going to do anything else on Christmas, anything else in the Christmas season, it needs to point back to that. It really needs to. Otherwise, we wind up cheapening the thing that is most important for us. So yes, that's why I wanted that one there to kind of as a memento of what it should be for us if we're going to do it at all.
I remember growing up. This is another kind of memory that I had, and it was my mother's favorite, I'm gonna say, ornament or decoration to put out, and it was the kneeling Santa. It was the kneeling Santa of, Jesus being born right there. It was just Santa right there kneeling, and we spent more time talking about that than I think any other ornament on a tree or things of that nature, our nativity. But that right there was like the merging of two worlds, which is really, really cool. So I'm glad I did have that message growing up. And that is something that, I mean, I'm hoping it gets handed down one day. So, Mother, if you're watching, I'd really like to have that one day for Winston to see. So I'm gonna get like 5 of those statues in the next 3 years. You watch.
Yeah, I like those. I like that imagery. That's something that, like I said, if you're going to do it, that's how you do it. That's how you do it. You point back to the truth.
That's cool. Thank you very much. Is there anything else we want to wrap up with, or final comments, Justin, before we turn it off for the night?
That's all I've got. I've exhausted my notes.
Okay. I will say that we do have a Santa fact checker in the audience, and I found out why, because Wayne Cook said if you're going to pretend to be Santa, you need to know a lot about the man. And
That's
so
fair.
every time you start a story or something, the rest of the explanation came like a minute before you could finish the story. Yeah, you'd start a story about this Santa and the law. Yeah, he punched a guy is what Wayne. I'm like, dude, Wayne, whoa. So, Wayne, I mean, as I told you in the comments, whenever we have Santa trivia night, you are coming with me. So, well, I guess we can wrap it up with that. I want to thank everybody so much for watching, even though we're not technically in place with one another tonight because of the storm. Thank you, Justin, so much for the wisdom and insight you brought on the real meaning and true meaning of Christmas. And it's hard for parents to make this call and to exercise and keep everybody happy. And I speak as one of them. But I learned a lot tonight, and I know there's a lot of nuggets that people have said, "Oh, I didn't know that." Like 8 legs? Come on, 8 reindeer? Who would have known? And like even Christina and I were both like, "Wait, he lived at the same time as Constantine?" So a lot of mind-blowing things here. This is really cool. So I love the history. Thank you for taking us through it. With that, I want to thank everybody for watching, and I want to turn it back over to Lee to sign us off for the evening. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Lee, wrap us up. Take us home.
Okay, guys, so it's up to me to deliver a bunch of announcements. Nobody wants to hear announcements, so I'll do it as fast as I can. So here's what's going on. On Sunday night at 7 p.m., we are doing our second to last watch party. It's a portion of Grace. It's from 2013, and for those of you who need the parental warning, it's PG-13, which means parental advisory is suggested. Well, anyway, it's good. Join us. We've been having a great time with the live chats and everything. It's been a lot of fun. On Sunday, it's church, of course. Next Wednesday night is December 23rd. We will not be doing Wednesday Night in the Word, but we will be showing our brand new A Quarantine Christmas featuring all of you. If you haven't submitted your cell phone video, you have until midnight tonight to send it to me. So thank you for that. So far, we've gotten a tremendous response. It's been fantastic. And I'll tell you what, putting this thing together, it has just been a blast. We got some music, some really fantastic Christmas music from our praise team. We have Pastor John delivers a message, and you guys, and you're sharing some really, really wonderful and funny stories that I just can't wait to share with you guys. So make certain you tune in next Wednesday night, 7 p.m. for a watch party for the Quarantine Christmas. All right, so with that said, moving on. That's the 23rd. The 24th is Christmas Eve. And Christmas Eve, of course, we're going to have a Christmas Eve service at the Columbus Baptist Church, and that's at 7 o'clock. So if you could be
What
there,
time is that service going to be, Lee? What time is the
at,
service?
Yes,
7
candlelight
o'clock.
Christmas Eve service at the Columbus Baptist Church. Okay, so that's that. But on Christmas Day happens to be on Friday, and people ask, are we having Friday night service on Christmas Day? And the answer is no. We are not having Christmas Day service on Friday that night, nor are we having one on New Year's Day, January 1st. So those 2 Friday nights, no Friday night service, okay? Now, here's the other thing. All these announcements. A lot of no's coming up. The following Wednesday, we are going to be taking 2 weeks off at least for Wednesday Night in the Word. We've been running nonstop throughout the pandemic, throughout the quarantine, throughout the lockdown without taking a single break. So we're going to take 2 weeks off just to kind of recharge our batteries, and then we'll be back with more Wednesday Night on the Word. So that would be December 30th and January 6th, okay? So I think those are the end of all of my crazy announcements. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you're all home safe and not out in this crazy snow. And with that, I'm going to sign off, but I do want to say one last thing. Thank you for joining us once more time, and stay tuned for next Sunday night, or excuse me, for Wednesday night for the Quarantine Christmas. Have a good night, everybody, and talk to you soon.